Under the Bayanihan Act, the law mandates that the lessor gives a 30-day grace period on residential rents falling due within the period of the ECQ. The 30-day grace period is determined to be the 30-day calendar days following the last due date of the rent which fell due within the ECQ. So for example, the last due date is May 10. So you have 30 days from May 10 or until June 9 to as a grace period to your lessee.
Attorney, I have a condo in BGC and my tenant is not paying. He says his business is affected and has no collection, but they are continuously living in the unit. How do I legally handle this? They can afford the rent but is not responding.
Okay, thank you for your question. So first, I would just like to discuss first the rules on the grace period and rent deferment under the Bayanihan Act. Under the Bayanihan Act, the law mandates that the lessor gives a 30-day grace period on residential rents falling due within the period of the ECQ. The 30-day grace period is determined to be the 30-day calendar days following the last due date of the rent which fell due within the ECQ. So for example, the last due date is May 10. So you have 30 days from May 10 or until June 9 to as a grace period to your lessee. Thereafter, the cumulative rents falling due within the ECQ shall be equally amortized in the next succeeding 6 months following the end of this ECQ. Note that the amortization will be on top of the regular rent that will fall due outside of the ECQ rent. So for example, the monthly rent is 30,000, but you have an installment payment of 5,000 every month. So that's 30 plus 5,000. Your lessee should pay 35,000 every month after the grace period and after the ECQ period. It's not clear in the question if the properties are residential or commercial units, but in any case, the same grace period and deferment policy also applies to commercial rents for micro, small, and medium enterprises. In your case, my suggestion is that first, you honor what the law provides. So you give the grace period, give them the deferment installment of the rent. If they still do not comply, you check your contract with them. Because if you've executed a well-drafted lease contract, there should be some procedure on how to address these issues of non-payment. So probably there must be a procedure for sending out notices, maybe a curing period also, and before you impose more harsher penalty, like for example, a lockout provision or an eviction proceedings. So you check your contract first. If you don't have a contract, or if you have a contract but doesn't state how you will address this situation, my suggestion is that you send a letter to the tenant stating that these are your new due dates for your rents, because it's also possible that your tenant is not aware of when to pay because of the ECQ and because of the Bayanihan Act. So you just send a letter nicely stating that, okay, because of the Bayanihan Act, we have extended your rent up to this date and you could pay up to this date for every 6 months and so. So if your tenant still refuse to pay, then send a demand letter. After that, there's still no response and it seems that your lessee has no intention of payment, then you could already proceed with the eviction process. So that's again sending out a notice of eviction, coordinating with your barangay, etc. But there's no provision in your contract for a lockout provision. You cannot just change the locks of the condo or just pull the person out of the unit. You're exposing yourselves to liability. So just start the eviction proceedings laid out under the law.
I have a tenant that is rude and abrasive with other tenants in our dormitory. I still have 6 months into the contract. What is the legal way of asking him to leave without rude tenant getting violent to me?
If you're running a dormitory, typically there's already house rules on how to govern this type of cases. So in the dormitory, because it's a shared space, typically there's a house rules already, and these house rules are incorporated in your contract of lease. That's the typical situation. However, if you do not have house rules, if you do not have a contract of lease, a well-written contract of lease, then my suggestion is this. Send first a letter to that person pricing him or her of her actions. Second would be, if that person still continues with this unacceptable or negative personality or actions, then you send a second letter stating that, or inviting him for mediation or to talk to him. Then if still the action still continues, then third would be an eviction already. However, I'm actually advocating for everyone to have a well-written contract of lease or house rules, because if you have the house rules already, you know what to do, you know what to follow. So moving forward, my suggestion is for you to draft a house rules, then you post that house rules in a common area, in a conspicuous place in your dormitory. Since it's a dormitory, I suppose you do not accept transient tenants. So it's typically long-term, probably 3 or 6 months. Or you could attach that. Whenever they rent a space, you could attach the house rules. They will abide by the house rules.
Hi, Attorney Rachel. My tenant from a warehouse is asking for a discount. But due to my financial obligations and mortgage, I cannot give the discount as I will be negative and in debt. How do I respond without sounding inconsiderate of the COVID situation and still be legally safe from the Bayanihan Act?
Again, because of the Bayanihan Act, actually initially there was a misconception that the lessors mandated to give a waiver or a discount on the rent. But the Bayanihan Act does not compel lessors to give discount or waiver of rent. What was given is really just a grace period and a deferment of rent. So in your case, my suggestion is that you just explain to your tenant that you also have your personal financial obligations and you need the rent to meet those obligations. Maybe as a concession, you could offer a longer grace period. Like for example, under the law, the minimum is 30 days. You could give 60 days. Instead of giving 6 months deferment or installment payment for the rental due, you can make it longer. Like for example, they could pay it instead of 6 for the next 8 or 10 months. Especially if it's a warehouse, it's a commercial space, most likely you're into long-term lease. So definitely you could accommodate for a longer installment period. Especially for long-term lease, you want to keep the tenant because as of now, actually it's very difficult to look for tenants. So if your tenant is still willing to pay, it's just that for this period, it's very difficult to raise funds. Maybe a longer grace period, a longer installment period would be a way to go.
Thank you very much, Attorney, for that fantastic legal point of view answer. Hi, Attorney Rachel. My residential apartment tenant has not paid me for 3 months already. There's still 10 months into the contract. He is asking me for more compassion because he lost his job, but he continuously stay in the unit without paying. He's unable to pay even if I give him Bayanihan Act installment. How can I legally ask him to exit?
First, you have to check your contract. You have to check the procedures laid down in your contract. If there's a procedure on how to address this issue. Because under the law, currently what you can do is to provide him the grace period and installment period to pay the past due accounts. However, if he still refuses, which it seems he still refused to pay, you check your contract. Because there might be a way out in your contract, like for example, a lockout provision. What do you mean by a lockout provision? In the lockout provision, the tenant or the lessor instead are authorized to get items from the property and apply it as a rental payment. Also, without any liability, because under the law, you cannot do that. Without that lockout provision, you cannot do that. However, if you have a lockout provision in your contract, it allows you sometimes to give to take personal properties of your lessee and apply it as a part payment. Second, you could also lock them out of their unit. So that's eviction already. However, if you do not have a lockout provision in your contract, then you cannot take the law in your hand. So you have to go to the barangay, report it, and get the assistance of police for the eviction. If it's not successful again, you have to go to court. There's no other way. Moving forward, to avoid this situation, it's very difficult to evict tenants unless you have a lockout provision in your contract. So moving forward, my suggestion is that for you to draft a contract where there's clearly steps what you would do in case of non-payment or violation of your contract of lease, and have a lockout provision that gives you a power to regain possession of your property without going through the expensive judicial process.
Thank you very much, Attorney Rachel. Thank you for emphasizing the importance of a lockout provision.